Today's subject of discussion is whether religions and belief in God are essential for an ethical and moral life and the resulting peace and prosperity in societies. I shall not try your patience with the story of evolution. Suffice it to say that we, the anatomically modern Homo sapiens, appeared on Earth about to say 200,000 years ago. Except for some characteristic exceptions, we lived like most other social animals, traveling in bands of kin in matrilineal societies. Then, some 40,000 years or 50,000 years ago, our brains went through a quantum jump and things have never been the same with us. We can call this a cultural explosion or a cultural Big Bang. At this stage, unlike other animals, we began to sing, dance, paint pictures, as well as to tell stories, wear feather in our hair, chains, beads, and trinkets around our necks, and to invent new ways of doing things. This continues to this day with computers, mobiles, artificial intelligence, space probes, body piercing, tattooing, and so forth. Before we go any further, let us consider the birth and evolution of religion. There are two important mechanisms which can explain the formation of modern religions. One is our tendency to produce what are called memes. The word meme was invented by Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary scientist. According to Wikipedia, a meme is an idea, behavior, or style that spreads by means of imitation or by communication from person to person within a culture and from one culture to another in an area, often with the aim of conveying a particular phenomenon, theme, or meaning. Memes are cultural analogues to genes in that they self-replicate, mutate, and respond to selective social and economic pressures. Examples of memes are private property, capitalism, resurrection, miracles, fraternity, equality, marriage, etc. These memes keep mutating and evolving like living genes. Some of the memes which evolved in the religious sphere were God, spirits, goblins, prayer, offerings, omnipotence, omniscience, and so forth. Now, there are more memes in our lexicon than words representing real material things. Another very significant mechanism which contributed to the formation of myths and religions is what is called anthropomorphism. Though most of you know its meaning, I shall speak a few words on anthropomorphism for the sake of a formal presentation. Anthropomorphism springs from two words, anthropos for man and morph means mental or visual projection. Thus, anthropomorphism means man's innate psychological or psychological compulsion to project or morph human nature and characteristics onto non-human entities such as animals and trees, as well as onto inanimate things like mountains, winds, storms, sea, rivers, lightning, thunder, and so forth. In fables, we see animals like the hare and tortoise taunting each other and competing like humans to determine who is faster. In like manner, we see a tree and a blade of grass as well as a mountain and the wind taunting each other like humans to determine which of them is stronger and resilient. Our tendency to anthropomorphize things did not stop at materialistic beings such as animals, trees, mountains, and forces of nature such as wind and rain. Instead, we anthropomorphize non-existent and immaterial memes like nature, fortune, freedom, etc. Thus, we use terms like fortune smiled on us, or mother nature, or lady of freedom, etc. This tendency to anthropomorphize even non-existent memes is called reification. This projection of human aspirations and human nature onto forces of nature is called animism. Animism states that the whole of the planet Earth has consciousness. Everything, be it people, animals, plants, rocks, water, etc., have souls like us, think like us, and act like us. According to the Gaia theory, the earth and all living things together work as a single organized mechanism. Obviously, animism is a form of anthropomorphism. The traditional religions of Japan is called Shinto. It is animistic. In this religion, it is believed that kami, which is the spirit of nature, exists everywhere. The Inuits from the Canadian Arctic follow a ritual while hunting an animal so as not to offend the soul of the hunted animal, as it would bring bad luck to the hunter. In some parts of the world, woodcutters appease the spirit of any tree they have to cut down by first asking it to forgive them. Another factor which is as important or more so than animism, which contributed to the religion, is our habit of dreaming while asleep. There are other animals like dogs which dream as they sleep, but they do not spin stories from their dreams like we do. It may have been in this context the religions of the Australian Aborigines are based on the meme called dream time. According to this tradition, everything existed only in the dream time. Only later on did things coalesce or crystallize to form our present material world. That is their story of creation. So the most important factors which contributed to the birth of religions are our unparalleled imagination and ability to spin stories, our innate inclination to anthropomorphize our human nature to non-human entities, and our ability to dream while we are asleep. In the beginning, we may have spun anthropomorphic and animistic stories about the forces of nature such as the wind, lightning and thunder. Further on, we made up stories about life after death from dreams of ancestors. Thus, the most important aspects of religion are animism and ancestor worship. It was ancestor worship that evolved into the memes about gods, spirits, devils, and other supernatural entities. Whenever personal misfortune such as a disease or an accident fell on anyone, our ancestors again thought about what caused it, just as they thought what caused the wind or lightning or thunder. They came to the conclusion that it was the displeasure of the gods or the spirits of the dead and other supernatural beings which led to these misfortunes, both personal as well as at the social or society level. Again, due to our anthropomorphic compulsions, we thought of placating or mollifying these supernatural forces so that their displeasure and anger could be thwarted. This led to anthropomorphic ways of supplication and gifts to these supernatural forces. The wrath of the gods were attributed to following among many other causes: infringement of divine laws, improper ways of making of offerings, social crimes such as dishonesty and violence, infringement of social and cultural laws. The Ten Commandments offer an excellent example of such causes which can invite the wrath of the gods. The first four commands are about worshipping only one God, not worshipping any idols, not taking God's name in vain, and about observing the Sabbath. All of these pertain to the God of Israel only, and as such applicable only to the Israelis. These four commandments do not have an ethical or moral dimensions. Such infringement of religious codes may be called as sin. Sins vary from religion to religion. Thus, eating pork is a sin for Muslims and Jews, whereas for Christians, pork is wholesome. It is a mortal sin for Catholics not to attend the Sunday masses, whereas other religions and cults may not have such restrictions. Thus, chapter 15 of the book of Numbers narrates how a man picking up firewood on Sabbath day is stoned to death, a punishment reserved for adulterers and murderers. The second set of biblical commandments, such as you shall not commit adultery, you shall not covet your neighbor's house and servants and so on, etc., are vague codes which are more broken than observed. Besides these, there are societies, many societies in fact, which do not consider adultery a crime. It may be observed that in the Stone Age, societies were promiscuous, and the words marriage, husband, wife, all this adultery, etc., had no significance to them. These laws also change with passage of time. Thus, adultery, blasphemy, homosexuality, and other sins which attracted the capital punishment in biblical times and Quranic times do not hold any kind of gravity they had. Then comes the third set of laws. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. These are all universal laws applicable to all societies irrespective of time and place. These represent the basic laws which are absolutely necessary for a smooth functioning of the society, irrespective of their religious beliefs or lack thereof. We may call this first set of laws religious laws, in that they vary from religion to religion. The second set of laws as cultural laws, in that they vary from culture to culture in place and time. And the third set of laws as moral and ethical laws, which are universal in time and place. Our ancestors were illiterate and not in a position to analyze and classify things as we have done here into religious codes, cultural codes, universal codes, etc. Instead, sins against the gods and crimes against humanity were judged as if they were equally grievous. These punishments were often handed down by authorities such as kings and priests, who often represented religious interests also. In those days, there was no secularism or the separation of state and religion. Temporal powers also judged on religious matters and vice versa. Popes sat in judgment over temporal matters later on. It may have been because religious laws, cultural laws, and ethical laws were inseparably intertwined in the past that people often conclude that without religion there will not be ethics and morals, and people will be no better than animals without religion. However, nothing could be further from the truth, as there is more than enough evidence that religions have been one of the biggest causes of bloodshed, such as in the Crusades and the wars and conflicts between different denominations of Christianity in the wake of the Reformation. In fact, wherever there are two religions in proximity, such as in India and Pakistan, or denominations of the same religions in proximity, such as in Iraq and Iran, we see sparks fly. According to Kipling, prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. But according to me, prostitution is the flip side of marriage, which became a social institution only after private property became the most important factor of economics in the agricultural age, some maybe 10,000 to 15,000 years ago. But long before that, some 50,000 years ago, there were priests who appeared as shaman, witch doctors, astrologers, soothsayers, oracles, incarnations, godmen, prophets, and so forth. Ever since, they have been swindling the knave public and living off them. Consequently, it may be rightly concluded that priesthood and not prostitution is the oldest profession in the world and the most ludicrous one. With their charisma and their gift of the gab, it was a matter of time before these parasites gained power and prominence, which often equaled or even surpassed those of kings. Thus, in India, Brahmins, the priestly class, are one notch above the ruling class called the Kshatriyas. They were feared because of their supernatural powers, whereas the Kshatriyas were feared only for their physical powers. What is more, they feared the priestly class even when they were dead, whereas the kings and the emperors held no fear once they were dead. These priests often acted as power brokers and interpreters of the pleasure and displeasure as well as the will of the gods. The prayers, the supplications, the ceremonies they prescribed for gaining the goodwill of the irritable and quick-tempered gods evolved into elaborate holy masses and other religious ceremonies we have today. There are three important ingredients in all religions. One, God and other supernatural beings. Two, the faithful or the devotees. And three, the priests. All religions survive on the offerings of the devotees. However, God owns everything on earth, and making offerings to God is like me taking something already in your possession and gifting it back to you as if it were mine. God does not need any of our gifts as they are already His to do with as He pleases. However, the priests enter the picture and persuade the devotees to make offerings to the gods through them, through these priests for a better outcome. These offerings end up in the pockets of the priests who fatten themselves on these offerings and load it over the devotees without contributing anything meaningful to the society. The ultimate loser in the equation is the naive devotee who is made to believe that his offerings or investments in time and resources will serve him. This parasitical role of the priests was recognized by the Charvakas of India, who declared some 600 years before the Christian era that scriptures are an incoherent rhapsodies whose only usefulness is to provide a livelihood for the priests. Religions are incoherent rhapsodies whose only usefulness is to provide a livelihood to the priests. The priestly class, such as self-proclaimed incarnations and prophets, manipulate the scriptures to serve their selfish ends. Thus, Muhammad manipulated the Quran, and Joseph Smith manipulated the Mormon scriptures to serve their sexual gratification and other material agenda. The stories our ancestors spun around their campfires about supernatural beings kept changing from mouth to mouth and generation to generation, like viruses and genes mutating and evolving in the world of the living. The shaman and witch doctors played a significant role in this evolution of religious memes by ensuring that their interests were protected at every stage. Then, some 3000 years ago, we invented writing. Man invented writing mostly for commercial and accounting purposes, but it was a matter of time before the priests adapted this discovery to serve their ends, just as they do now, using scientific discoveries such as the mass media to propagate superstition. Thus, myths of the then literate world were committed to written books such as the Vedas in India, the Epic of Gilgamesh of Babylon, the Odyssey of Greece, the Avesta of Persia, and so forth. The myths of the Bible, the Quran, and the Mormon Bible were some of the latest such myths to be committed to writing. But once these scriptures or myths were committed to writing, the possibility of them mutating and evolving any further were curtailed. Instead, these myths became fossilized, or they became fossils of the cultures of the ancient societies in which these myths arose. Thus, the Vedas, the Avesta, the Odyssey, and the Old Testament represented the cultures of the societies in which these myths arose, including their pantheons and their religious practices, as well as their cultural practices such as music and cuisine. Later on came other scriptures like the New Testament, the Quran, the Mormon Bible, and so on, which imitate these ancient scriptures in content and style. It may also be noted that all these written myths arose in the agricultural age when these societies were more stratified and hierarchical than ever before or thereafter. The social hierarchies of the agrarian patrilineal societies were reflected in their pantheon with an all-powerful emperor god and minions like angels, messengers, and even courtesans such as the Huris in the Quran and the Apsaras in the Hindu myths. Most of the prominent gods of the agrarian age are often pictured as male emperors like Jupiter or patriarchs like Jehovah. This in turn may have meant that gods like Jupiter and Vishnu represented agricultural societies, whereas gods like Jehovah represented herding societies like the Israelis. It is based on these written myths and scriptures that all of today's religions arose almost simultaneously within a few centuries of each other after humans discovered writing. However, writing down the myths did not prevent these myths and their meanings from mutating and evolving altogether. These books had to be copied by hand in those days and for a few thousand years further to make it available to the priests as well as to the devotees. This act of copying by hand provided man's unlimited imagination further scope for mutation and evolution. Thus, there were about 85 versions of the New Testament, some 3 centuries after Christianity was founded. This went on until Gutenberg invented the movable type of setting and printing in the 15th century. As a result, the mutations or errors in the Gospels copied over the last 2000 years far exceeded the total number of words in the Gospels. The errors in the Gospels exceed the number of words in the Gospel. However, printing also failed to tether man's imagination. Thanks to printing, literacy soared, and this enabled even uneducated men and women to read the scriptures and to interpret them at will. This spawned numerous sects or denominations of the same religion based on the same printed scriptures. As a result, Christianity alone has around 40,000 sects based on as many interpretations of the same Bible. In contrast, the myths of the illiterate, primitive and nomadic people of the world carried on mutating and evolving prolifically as before. What is more, their pantheons reflected the egalitarian structure of their societies, with the mother goddesses being very prominent in tune with the primitive societies and their matriarchal social structure. These myths of the primitive societies with no written texts still go on mutating in places like India, where godmen and myths about them proliferate almost exponentially. Some of these book-based religions like Judaism and Vedic Hinduism were tribal in nature and restricted to local cultures such as that of India and Israel, in that they were against proselytization. Conversion was not an option for these tribalistic religions. One had to be a Vedic Hindu or a Jew by birth. Later on came religions like Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Christianity, Manichaeism, Islam, as well as their denominations which were universal in nature. And they cut across tribal and cultural lines. However, they still remained partisan in that they treated those of the same religion as those of the same tribe, while others were treated often as enemies, as in tribal cultures. Now we come to the subject matter of these presentations. Are religions necessary for a peaceful society based on ethics and morals, as the faithful boast? Ethics and morals are often used interchangeably to denote behavior which contribute to the smooth functioning of the society. Two of these characteristics which contribute to the smooth function of the society are honesty and non-violence. In fact, honesty and non-violence are essential ingredients of any ethics or morals in any society, irrespective of culture or religion. I'm an atheist. I had a trading business in chemicals. Like most businesses, my business depend upon mostly on credit buying from my suppliers and on credit selling to my customers. This credit buying and selling depended on mutual faith and trust. What is more, my suppliers as well as my customers belong to different religions and cultures as is normal in India. Most of us kept our trust and carried on successfully in spite of our ethnic differences. However, there were a few who, for different reasons, including bad luck, broke the trust and failed to pay up even after many moratoriums or deferments. Those who failed to keep their trust had to be eliminated for our own survival. Consequently, those who failed to settle their debts found themselves out of business. Even atheists like me who do not cater to any religion have to be honest and trustworthy in our dealings if we are to be successful in business or in social dealings. A man who is never punctual in keeping appointments and settling debts stands little chance of any success in business or in job or in any profession, irrespective of the religion he professes. It is the same with violence. A man who resorts to violence as the first and best means of resolving differences is shunned and ostracized by his own kin and ultimately ends up in tatters. Even social animals like elephants and monkeys ostracize violent members of their society, which pose a threat to them. So it is not for the sake of any god or fear of hell that we abstain from deceit and violence. Instead, it is for our own sake that we stick to ethics and morals in our dealings. China is an atheist society, which is now economically one of the most successful in the world. This would not have been possible if religion superstitions are essential for peace and prosperity in societies. There are also secular societies like the countries of Scandinavia, which are highly successful though delinked from religion. It may also be noted that all these secular societies have much the same laws as the theocratic countries of the world when it comes to honesty, violence, or non-violence and other factors that contribute to the smooth running of the society. What is more, these secular societies have a much lower incidence of crime than theocratic states like Pakistan or Iran. Are ethics and religion complementary in any way? In the past, human sacrifice and cannibalism were part of religion, which would not have been so if religions eschewed violence and bloodshed. The Agoris of India, they are in North India actually, they consume morsels of human flesh from the burning ghats or burial ghats of Benares in the belief that it will save them from the endless cycles of birth and rebirth. In like manner, there are temples in India where singing obscene songs to the gods are the normal way of offerings or ceremonies. In the Philippines, they enact the Passion of Jesus every year in the hope that they will get good returns. There are many such superstitious practices in the world, all of which can be classified as religion and have nothing whatsoever to do with ethics or morals. Then there are criminal groups like the mafia who are deeply religious and offer prayers for the success of their criminal activities. There is a village in Tirunelveli district of South India which specializes in murderous armed robberies in the adjoining states of India. Before setting out on their murderous raids, they conduct elaborate religious ceremonies for the success of their murderous missions. Here again we see that religion is resorted to for the success of criminal activities. Bishops conducted solemn masses and other ceremonies before the Christian armies set out on the murderous crusades, whereas Muslims conducted their own version of prayers before they set out to defend Jerusalem from these crusaders. In like manner, solemn religious ceremonies were conducted before heretics were made burned at the stakes during the Inquisition. proving that religion is often closely linked to violence. In the wake of the Reformation, Europe was plunged into a series of wars where Christians were pitted against Christians in a fratricidal war. Here, religion was the cause of the meaningless wars. What is more, opposing groups prayed to the same God for success in their fratricidal endeavors, even though they preached peace all the time. In the Greek myths, we see gods resorting to even patricide to gain power. Thus, Cronus castrated his own father Uranus in a struggle for power. Cronus was in turn overthrown and imprisoned by his son Zeus. Most of these gods also married their own siblings in what may be termed as gross incest. It is much the same in Hindu mythology, where gods resort to all kinds of immoral practices and debauchery to gain their ends, reflecting the practices prevalent in those societies which created these gods and compiled these scriptures. We also see in the Vedas the top god raping his own daughter and having sex with his granddaughter in Rig Veda chapter 10, 61 to 70. The lawgiver of the Vedic Hinduism was Manu. It seems he had dozens of wives and scores of children. But Manu's laws did not prevent his sons from setting out on fratricidal conflicts, which left around 60 of them dead. In the Hindu myths, Brahma creates Brahmins, the priestly class, from his mouth, Kshatriyas, the soldier class, from his navel, Vaishyas, the trading class, from his thighs, and the Shudras, the serving class, from his feet. This led to the caste system in India, which is one of the most cruel and discriminatory systems of the world, which divides Indian politics into many groups even to this day along the caste lines. The Aryan pantheon is divided into two classes, Asuras and Devas. These two groups are forever locked in a no-holds-barred struggle for power, which involves all kinds of unethical practices. But the strange thing is that the Vedic Hindu myths picture the Devas as good and the Asuras as evil, though there is not much to distinguish between them in their actions. In contrast, the Persian myths paint the Devas as evil and the Asuras or Ahuras as benign deities. Obviously, the Avesta-based Persians and the Vedic Indians descended from the same ancestry, which later on got entangled with each other in a fratricidal war for wealth and power. Vishnu, the Hindu god, is said to have incarnated many times to eradicate evil. But all we see in the Hindu myths is the different incarnations of Hindu resorting to all kinds of treachery to serve the ends of the gods. Thus we see Parasuram, one of the first incarnations of Vishnu, setting out on a genocidal mission to kill all the Kshatriyas, including pregnant women and unborn babies. In like manner, we see Ram and Krishna, the most important incarnations of Vishnu, engaging in all kinds of deceit and violence to win wars and gain power. In the Old Testament, we also see God and his prophets engaging in partisan activities which judge people by their ethnicity rather than by their actions, by their tribe rather than by actions. Those who are not with us are against us seems to be the guiding principle in the Bible and other religious texts. In the Old Testament also, we see God and his prophets engaging in partisan activities which judge people by their ethnicity rather than by their actions. Those who are not with us are against us seem to be the guiding principle in the Bible and other religious texts. We see God himself punishing thousands of generations of humankind for an insignificant act of disobedience by Adam and Eve, an act which God could have written off easily. This is in violation of his own laws in Deuteronomy chapter 24:16, as well as in Ezekiel and other verses in the Bible, which state in effect that a son will not bear the iniquity of the father, and a father will not bear the iniquity of the son. Instead, the righteousness of the righteous man will fall upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked man will fall upon him. God picks Abraham as the father of his people, and right away we see Abraham pimping of his wife Sarah to the Pharaoh in Genesis 12, and later on to Abimelech, the king of Gerar, in Genesis 20. In both cases, we see that Abraham is the sinner. However, the God of Israel takes the opposite view and threatens the Pharaoh and King Abimelech with dire consequences for having sex with Sarah. They are also advised to bestow money and gifts on Abraham for his crime. This also begs the question as to why God waited till Abraham took his wife to the Pharaoh and the king Abimelech, where God could have just as well warned them of dire consequences even before Abraham brought her to them. Even easier would have been for God to dissuade Abraham from pimping of Sarah even before Abraham even thought of the crime. In like manner, in Exodus we see God hardening the hearts of the Pharaoh and the Egyptians at least 9 times against freeing the Israelites and then punishing the Egyptians for it, when God could have avoided the confrontation by softening their hearts and working out a win-win situation between the Egyptians and the Israelis. Obviously, God did not want peace in society. Instead, he escalated the situation to destroy the Egyptians as if they were not his children. In the book of Numbers, chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, God orders the Israeli soldiers to kill every male child, every married woman of the Midianites, and to keep alive only the virgins for themselves. Later on in Joshua chapter 11, we see the Israel God going a step further and ordering Joshua and his murderous soldiers to kill all men, women and children as well as the cattle of Jericho, and to burn the city down. God also stops the sun from setting to help Joshua carry out his barbarous genocide in which even animals were not spared. In fact, if we look at history, religion has led to more violence than any other social or cultural factor. It may also be noted that it is a stubborn inflexibility of the books on which organized religions are based that they lead to such violence. In contrast, natural religions without any written scriptures do not account for so much havoc in societies as organized religions of the books do. Xenophon, who lived some 500 years before Jesus, said that Greek gods represented all that is shameful and disgraceful among men. They steal, they commit adultery and deceive one another. This is the same vein that Thomas Paine said, the biblical God it is in the same vein that Thomas Paine said of the biblical God. It is from the Bible that man has learned cruelty, rapine and murder. For the belief in a cruel God makes a cruel man. The same can be said of any of the gods or religions or scriptures. When endorsements of heinous crimes such as mass murders and slavery in the Bible are pointed out, Christian devotees are quick to point out that all this is only in the Old Testament, whereas in the New Testament Jesus advocates mercy and love. Obviously, these devotees have not read Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 18, in which Jesus says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For I tell you truly, until heaven and earth pass away, not a single jot, not a stroke of a pen will disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." In fact, Jesus does not utter even a single word against slavery throughout his life. Saint Paul, the de facto co-founder of Christianity, understood this, and so in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul commands slaves and servants to be obedient to their masters. There are also other endorsements of slavery by Paul, and Christian slave owners often used these biblical endorsements of slavery to justify their slavery. In Matthew chapter 10:34, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household." Similarly, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 30, Jesus says, "Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters." This is as bigoted a statement as they come. Why does the biblical God forbid vengeance, murder, and dishonesty in one part of the Bible, and then order the Israelis to commit mass murder and genocide later on in another part of the Bible? The Israelis had a tribal culture in which those of the same tribe were treated according to set codes, whereas such codes of behavior did not apply to those who did not belong to their tribe. This is the reason why the Israelis had the commandments forbidding violence and deceit on one hand, and then resorting to violence, genocide, and slavery on the other. Again, devout Christians jump into the fray to argue that Jesus was a liberal and cosmopolitan in this regard. However, in Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 to 6, Jesus says, "Go not unto the way of the Gentiles, and unto the city of Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." There are also other tracts in the Gospels which prove that Jesus was as partisan and biased as Moses or Joshua. It may have been the reign of law imposed by Rome and that prevented Jesus from behaving like another Moses or Joshua. It was the same reign of tolerance by Rome that facilitated Paul to establish Christianity. Bishop John Shelby Sponge says, "The texts from the source we call the Holy Scripture have been used in the past to defend the divine right of kings, to oppose the Magna Carta, to condemn Galileo, and to assert that the sun does not indeed rotate around the earth, to justify slavery, segregation, and apartheid, to keep women from being educated, entering the professions, voting, or being ordained, to justify war, to persecute and kill the Jews, to condemn other world religions, and to continue the oppression and rejection of gay and lesbian people as well as transgenders." However, the bishop goes on to say that he is a Christian because he believes that Jesus Christ fully expressed the presence of God, presence of a God of compassion and selfless love. Obviously, the bishop thinks in bits and pieces and forgets that Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 18, in which Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And thereby Jesus endorses all that the bishop dictates in the Bible. It is much the same with all devotees, irrespective of religions. They project with gusto the verses in their own scriptures which endorse their bias, while ignoring the verses which contradict their beliefs. It also seems that apologists like Bishop Shelby are not well versed about how he himself became a Christian. Christianity was just one of many messianic cults in Palestine, known as Essenes, Ebionites, and Nazarenes. It was Paul who subscribed to one such cult and named it Christianity. He then took it to Rome, where it merely survived as one of many cults there for some 3 centuries. Then Queen Helena took a fancy to it, and under her influence, her son Constantine became devoted to it, especially after he won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge against his brother-in-law under the sign of the cross. Constantine was succeeded by Emperor Theodosius, who also used his imperial powers to spread Christianity. Later on, Emperor Shaman of the Holy Roman Empire forced Christianity on his subjects. In the process, he massacred around 3,600 Saxons who refused to convert to Christianity. Consequently, we can assume that Shelby is a Christian because of the conversions forced on his ancestors by Constantine, Theodosius, and Charlemagne. Later on, Christians who were thus converted by force colonized the world, and it is as a result of this violent colonization that Christianity became the majority religion on earth. In like manner, Islam and other religions also flourished through imperial violence and favoritism. According to the Bible, God is said to have delivered the 10 Commandments inscribed on tablets of stone or clay. This is an imitation of King Hammurabi of Babylon, who lived about 1800 or 1800 years before Jesus and a few centuries before Moses. Hammurabi was one of the first to implement the rule of law by inscribing his laws into stone tablets and installing them at different places in his kingdom. These are known as the codes of Hammurabi. These codes spell out punishment for various crimes. The codes of Hammurabi and the law of Moses in the Torah contain numerous similarities. However, they differ significantly in one aspect, in that Hammurabi does not mention God in any of his commandments, which proves that moral codes have nothing whatsoever to do with God or religion. The Code of Hammurabi and the Law of Moses in the Torah contain numerous similarities, such as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, though they worship different gods. There are 282 of these codes of Hammurabi, which endorse the traditions of his kingdom and accordingly endorse slavery and other unsavory practices just as the Bible does. Let us now see some of the laws of the Bible and examine how these influence ethics and morals. There are about 613 commandments, of which some have universal ethical dimensions, such as the laws forbidding violence and deceit. However, there are about 50 laws, such as laws against idolatry, blasphemy, as well as the ones regarding the Sabbath and circumcision, which pertain only to the Jews and not applicable universally. In addition to these, there are laws promoting intolerance of idol worship, as well as laws endorsing slavery. Here are some of the laws in the Bible which have no moral dimensions whatsoever. Men must shave their hair off the sides of their head, and men must not shave their beards with a razor. This is Leviticus 19. Then men must not wear women's clothing, and women must not wear men's clothing. That is Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. The Bible also forbids tattooing the skin, which is Leviticus 19, verse 28. Then there are ridiculous laws like you shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. This is in Genesis chapter 1, 11 to 12. Then there is Leviticus 15, verse 19 to 33, which commands, menstruating women to be kept away from society. In addition, the Bible Leviticus 20:13 commands that homosexuals be put to death. There are other scriptures like the Quran and Manusmriti which have much the same categories of laws, such as universal laws, tribal laws, religious laws, and ridiculous ones. Obviously, these laws formulated by religion cannot claim that man cannot live in peace and harmony without these laws. But even more important is the fact that these laws or commandments of the scriptures or books are fossilized and cannot change in tune with changing conditions in the world. Thus, the Quranic laws against usury may have had a relevance 1500 years ago, when the relative prices of labor and food remained stable and the value of money also remained constant in terms of the amount of food and the essential goods it could buy. Thus, in the past, say even 100 years ago in India, with $1,000, you could get approximately the same amount of goods now as last year or 20 years ago. Thus, we see that Hammurabi's codes written on stone steles or pillars some 1750 years before Christian era prescribes the wages for different kinds of labor as well as the price for different commodities such as grain. These stone pillars as well as the laws written on them, including wages and prices of commodities, were expected to last for hundreds or even thousands of years, and money had a fixed stable value against wages and market prices. However, in modern times, the market is highly volatile and unstable, as a result of which $1,000 cannot get us today the same quantity of goods or services as 10 years ago. Thus the Quranic laws banning usury must apply even in the present globalized market, where prices of commodities. Consequently, to say that these same Quranic laws banning usury must apply even in present globalized market, where price of commodities change from second to second, is outright dumb. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus advises that you love your enemies and to turn the right cheek if stricken on the left, and so forth. But in another part of the Gospels, Jesus says, he who is not with me is against him. He who is not with him is against him. And in Matthew chapter 10:34, Jesus says that he came to bring a war, to turn brother against brother, and so on. Why should an educated modern man follow everything Jesus or any of the 2,000-year-old mythical figures are said to have said? One of the most ethical statements made by Jesus is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But this is not something original. Some 500 years before Jesus, there lived Confucius in China, who said, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Matthew chapter 7:12 merely plagiarized this advice from Confucius, cooked it around a bit, and then put it into Jesus' mouth as if it were a gospel command. Then there was Epicurus, who lived around 340 years before Christ. He was an atheist through and through, but he was of the opinion that the greatest reward of righteousness is peace of mind. This is as noble an opinion as can be. Then there was Aesop, who lived around 620 BC to around 560 BC. You must have heard of Aesop fables. Aesop had not even heard of Jesus or of Christianity, but he taught, no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. It was also Aesop who advocated my most favorite dictum, honesty is the best policy. In ancient India, there were Buddha and Mahavira who lived some 500 years before Jesus or Christianity. They taught that ahimsa or non-violence, which applies to all living beings. In like manner, there was Chanakya in India who declared that righteousness is the root of all happiness. This Chanakya also lived some 370 years before Jesus. Archaeologists who studied ancient burial sites and skeletons therein have found at least 50 cases of human empathy and compassion for others. One such skeleton was that of a Neanderthal who lived some 45,000 years ago. He had died around the age of 50 with one arm amputated, loss of vision in one eye, and other injuries. But it seems he lived for over 10 years with all these deformities. He could not have survived like that without help from others. There was another 4,000-year skeleton found in Man Bak of Vietnam, which is laid to rest curled up in a fatal position. After studying this skeleton, the archaeologists found that his used vertebrae archaeologists found that his fused vertebrae and weak bones had forced him to live bent and crippled by disease. It is evident that he too had lived for years with help from others. They too had not heard of any Jesus or any of the modern religions which led to such compassion and humanism. In like manner, there are many stories of compassion even among animals, which again prove that it is not any god or religion that makes for compassion and empathy. I am inclined to think that many of the social animals like apes and humans succeeded in the evolutionary struggle for survival because they were empathetic and compassionate towards others of their own kind and cooperated with each other for mutual benefit. This cooperation was made possible only with laws and codes etched into their genes, etched into our genes. But as society became more complex, we need written laws and codes and religion has nothing whatsoever to do with these codes. Perhaps the most frequent debate humans engage in is about whether there is a god or not. There are millions of gods being worshipped, and debating whether there is a god or not without specifying the god is like debating whether there is a book or not without specifying the book. In the same vein, there are tens of thousands of religions and their denominations and beliefs in this world, and debating whether religion is conducive to ethics and morals without specifying a religion is like discussing whether there is a god or not without specifying the god. Our Stone Age ancestors lived in small consanguineous nomadic tribes of 20 or more, depending on the fertility of the territory they roamed in. They were insulated from their groups and fiercely protected their territory as wild animals do even now. They depended on each other for all their needs and so bonded with each other to a degree which we cannot even imagine now. Internal conflicts were settled before it grew out of proportion. However, in the face of external threats, they defended each other to the death, or rather, they had to do it. This carried on even under the agricultural age, where tribal and kinship ties were the only support you could fall back on for getting justice. In those days, there were no institutionalized forms of justice such as legislative bodies, police, or judicial systems as we have now. Instead, our ancestors had to help each other, mostly on the basis of kinship or friendship. Scores were settled by vendetta, which lasted for generations. Moses may have ordered the massacre of the male children of Midianites because they posed a danger to him and his children if those Midianites grew up into adulthood. So the biblical laws were formulated to hold the Israelis as one compact unit in the face of aggression from their enemies, as well as in attacking others and taking over their hard-earned positions. For them, humanity was divided into two groups. A group they could trust with their life, and there was a second group who always posed a threat to them. Thus, for them, humanity was divided into two. One they could trust with their lives, and the second they could never trust. What is more, in the ancient world, social changes came at a snail's pace, taking hundreds or thousands of years to become noticeable. So the ancients did not have to change their laws and codes for very long periods of times. In contrast, we live in a world where technology keeps changing at dizzying speeds, which requires amending a law even before the ink dries on the original law. So we cannot depend on laws or codes written on stone tablets which are expected to last forever. Instead, we need flexible codes which are ready to be amended. But ancient religions and laws stand in the way of such amendments and changes. Our Stone Age ancestors lived in promiscuous nomadic tribes which warranted laws suited to their way of life. These laws were changed in the agricultural age when private property, marriage, and joint families became the economic backbone of the society. We have now come to the industrial and digital way of life in which ancient laws formulated for the illiterate societies of the agricultural era are redundant. Instead, we need new laws to cater to the modern and highly technological, globalized and democratic way of life. Thus, we have cyber laws, banking laws, traffic laws, pollution laws, and thousands of others to cater to our modern times and societies. In addition, unlike the tribal courts of the past based on vendettas, we have courts of justice at various levels, including international courts of justice, to cater to a globalized world. What is more, modern laws are flexible and subject to amendment in accordance with the demands made on them, unlike the laws written in the scriptures. In the past 1 month or two, the countries of the world have formulated a set of new codes to handle the corona pandemic. Such a concerted effort, irrespective of geographical, tribal, religious, or other ethnic considerations, was unthinkable when today's religions and their principles and codes were committed to writing. Because of this global concerted effort to meet the corona pandemic, the death toll has been contained to a few 100,000. In contrast, the Black Plague, which hit the nations of the world in around 1342, took a toll of about 200 million dead. 200 million dead. This came about because at that time they thought along superstitious and religious lines for causes of the pandemic. Thus, some thought that the plague was caused by misalignment of the stars, while some religious leaders declared that the plague was sent by God to take the devotees to heaven and the non-devotees to hell. We can say that the victory of modern world over diseases such as corona, smallpox, cholera and malaria is the victory of modern science over religion and superstition, which played havoc with our ancestors. Modern laws are flexible and amendable along with the demands made on them, as in the case of the corona pandemic. In contrast, the 2,000-year-old fossilized laws of the established religions are not amendable to change, and so can lead to frictions in society when people of different religions catering to different canons live in close proximity, as in any modern democracy. Religions and their infallible books taught along the hierarchical lines and proposed without any evidence that kings were divine and that Brahmins were better than others. and that the whites were destined to rule over the blacks and coloreds. In the process, they sacrificed animals for gaining divine favors. But the theory of evolution teaches that all of us evolved from the same individual form of life billions of years ago, and that we should treat all humans and animals with compassion and empathy. Suppose we have a huge reservoir of water which has been treated to modern standards of hygiene, including disinfection from coliform and other bacteria. And now suppose we have a bottle of natural water preserved for hundreds or thousands of years, when they were not aware of coliform and other harmful microbes. What purpose would it serve to add that bottle of ancient but contaminated water to the tons of treated water in the reservoir, except to make the whole reservoir of water dangerous? As we have seen, the Bible has just about 600 rules, and some of them totally ridiculous, while others are unethical. In contrast, our legislative assemblies and other bodies are making thousands of laws and rules and regulations every year and amending them every month or so. In such a scenario, why do we need to entertain ancient religious laws created for Stone Age societies or for the illiterate and isolated societies of the agriculture age? Trying to solve modern globalized problems with ancient religions is like trying to repair a modern computer with a chisel and hammer. According to Aristotle, man is a political animal. In the same way, we can say that man is also a religious animal. With our unlimited powers of imagination and intuition, religions and superstitions come natural to us. We also tend to ascribe the wrong reason or cause to events without asking for evidence. The belief that superstitious powers help us in our endeavors may even have positive mental and psychological advantages. But priests in the garb of godmen, incarnations, and prophets confound the situation by claiming that their book and their gods alone are divine, while all others are profane. It is to serve their nefarious agenda that they claim that there cannot be ethics and morals without religion and without their particular brand of religion. Beware of these wolves in sheep's clothing. I am from India, and English is only an acquired language for me. I seldom use English for my day-to-day transactions. So any shortcomings in this English presentation may please be overlooked. Thank you for listening to me, and subscribe to my please.